What's your clap and slap ratio?
I probably don't get to 5. It's probably a good learning for me, that. But welcome to the podcast, Adam Walsh, CEO of John Good Group.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So for watchers, listeners, do you want to just introduce yourself, a bit about your backstory and what you're currently doing at John Good?
Yeah, no problem at all. So my background is typically family businesses. I've been in family businesses most of my career, and they tend to have one thing in common. They've all got quite big growth ambitions.
Yeah.
So my job has historically been in most of the leadership roles is about bringing a team together and trying to get them aligned to go on a bit of a mission and really go and achieve a goal. My background itself is marketing, commercial roles and sales. So that's where I sort of grew up. Started out university as a marketing degree and have really just progressed through there. Went through the ranks of a marketing department, took on some marketing leadership roles, ended up being put out there in the real world and tried to get into the sales environment, did okay in there. Built various different teams and did some of these sorts of things, then ultimately graduated into more leadership roles.
Excellent. And how long have you been at the John Good Group?
14 months. So I'm a relative newbie within the group. So the group itself went through a huge, and we are going through a huge period of transition. So if you go back to August, September 2021, the group disposed of its largest trading business, a business called Good Logistics.
Okay.
Good Logistics had 200 of our 300 headcount. It probably accounted for 80% of the group's turnover, half the group's profitability. It was a big deal, right? And not only did the trading business go, but the leadership of the group went at the same time. So CEO, CFO, HR, IT, marketing, everything went with this transaction. Wow. So it was a massive period of change. And really, so on day one, September the 1st, 2021, we had one member of staff at group who's now my CFO, Ben. And he was sort of wearing many hats and trying to keep the sort of wheels on the group, working with the board of directors. I was approached in sort of October, November time of that year, and then took post in January 2022. Time's flying by already.
I bet. And we'll get into kind of family business actually in a second, because I'm keen to hear about how that's different from, I guess, a non-family business. But we'd like to start with something that's a bit topical. And one of the things that you probably can't get away from at the minute is the Gary Lineker issue. Putting stuff on Twitter that his employer didn't agree with at the time, although seems to have rolled back on that position since then. But from a leadership perspective, I wanted to get your view on that in terms of, I guess, how much control should an employer have over what an employee puts out on social media, particularly as the business gets bigger and bigger, more and more employees? How do you control that, or should you control that?
So starting off with easy questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, don't do what the BBC did, I think is rule number one around that.
Good rule of thumb.
It's an incredibly difficult topic because, like a lot of things now, the boundaries between work and home and who you are as a person and who you are as in a profession, everything's blurring.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it is an incredibly difficult topic to get right and difficult subject to get right. And I think a lot of it leans back on the culture within an organization. So what is the culture of the business and what are you going to be willing to accept and not accept? And that's, I think, where the BBC have sort of got it slightly wrong, because were their guidelines clear enough? There's a debate around that. Were they clear on the contractual position between the different people and how those guidelines applied? Were they consistent in how they have managed previous situations on the same sort of topic? And then the BBC have got obviously the other big issue about impartiality and also the political environment they operate in. That's different for a business, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot to unpack in all of that. In terms of broadly how I've approached it in the past, probably more relevant than where we are now, because the John Good Group is going through a lot of trying to assess how we do these things right now. But in terms of the past, I think there's 2 or 3 clear ways to at least provide some of that clarity. The first is to have a really clear policy about how corporate accounts should be. So that's really clear and actually really easy to control. What's acceptable, what's not, what topics are you willing to go near, what you aren't.
Yeah.
So all the staff that are in and around the corporate accounts should be crystal clear on what they should and shouldn't do. You've then got your staff's personal accounts. Well, from a control perspective, I'm going to have to argue that generally that's their accounts. They're responsible for their own, how they are outside of the work environment. But I think work can assist with that. So this is the difference between a policy and guidelines and training. And I think you can help employees understand the ramifications of some of their choices outside of the work environment that can still impact the workplace itself. And that's where I think work can have some influence, but I wouldn't say necessarily control over what people post and don't post. And I think that's the bit where employers have to get a lot better, actually recognizing that they've got to try and give people the skills to manage some of these situations when they're outside of the workplace. I think that can be part of our responsibility as an employer.
So it's more guidance and training as opposed to rules and policies. What about LinkedIn? Because that's a bit of a blurred line, because you've got the brand on someone's page, and as we know from posting on LinkedIn regularly, you know, it can be easy to post the wrong thing, I guess. Is that an area that you would try and put some control, or is that a free territory for your employees?
Okay, so there's a couple of things in that. I like the culture that I want in the business is a culture where people are able to voice opinions on topics, okay? Because if you're not, that's not the sort of culture I want to have in my team. I want our team to be challenging. I think some challenge internally is a good one. So to then say to people, you can't challenge externally is probably a little bit hypocritical of me. But what I will acknowledge is that comes with an element of risk. And the question is, am I comfortable with the risk or not? So I'm going to argue, yes, I am, with some challenging opinions. Okay. But that still has a spectrum, right? So on one side, you've got clearly things that you should not be engaging with, whether it's a personal thing or on a work platform like LinkedIn. Yeah. So anything that falls into discrimination, pornography, any of these sorts of things, clearly no brainer, stay away from all of that. It's just not appropriate. You see a lot of stories on LinkedIn about people approaching people on LinkedIn through direct messenger and sending inappropriate things. You're bang to rights on those things. That's not what it's there for. Okay. Yeah. So you've got that end of the spectrum. You've then got the middle bit, which is where some personality comes in and some personal preference around subjects or topics. Well, my view on that is just be conscious about the choices that you're making and be ready to live with the consequences that come with your comments or how you engage with things on social media. But that's all about just being conscious about it. Are you doing this thinking of the consequences? There's areas even within that where you have to think more carefully again. So if it's a broad topic, and I'll give you a good example of a broad topic shortly, then you may be okay. But actually, if you're talking about some very specific topics that maybe involve a supplier or a customer or a former employee, or even a situation that can be tied back to a former employee or even a current employee, make the choice consciously, but live with the ramifications of that. I used to work for an oil company in Leeds. We were a distributor of BP products. Okay. And you remember the BP disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. Right? So that was an incredibly challenging time. Social media has definitely linked in, but social media was still around, but it maybe wasn't as prevalent in the work environment then. But you'd have people feeling really passionate about what BP as a business had done. And we had a real challenge internally about actually, how do we, I feel about what they did wasn't great, to be blunt, but actually, how do we deal with that? Because they're a major stakeholder in our organization. And the way we ended up tackling that was bringing the team together and just talking internally and then getting people to air out the stuff internally and talking about, well, look, we still need to trade with these guys. They're still the lifeblood of this business because they give us access to products and services. So we've got to recognize how important they are to us, but that doesn't stop you feeling the way you feel about an incident. And you've just got to think about that more consciously. And then you've got the far end of the spectrum, which is go for it. If someone's out of order, if someone's wrong, if they're incorrect about a topic, or you've got a strong opinion on it, go for it. Step in. Because I'd expect you to do that externally.
Yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it?
It is.
It's tough because we did a pod with our MD, Rob, a couple of weeks ago, and it was about whether you yourself, and there might be, someone, the analogy that was used was all to do with like, pass my health and safety, thing, here's my certificate. Okay, fine. It's not particularly newsworthy. To them, it might be. But then it's like, actually, do you go on and say, great for you and not bothered? Or do you just move on? And it's having that ability to do you, like you rightly say, Adam, like go in and answer or put a comment as you want to put it and just put up with whatever the ramifications are. But I guess in senior roles, you've got to be mindful of what that image is. If you go in with a personal comment, how that rebounds back to you as a leader of a business and what the impact on the business is. Potentially, probably 99 times out of 100, you're not going to maybe put what you really, really think because of the ramification. But it's tough, isn't it? And in those environments, you just sometimes have to think of the bigger picture rather than...
Yeah, I've always got the back of my mind, how does what I'm about to post reflect on the organisation that I represent? And sometimes that pulls me back from posting some of the stuff that, I feel passionate about, if I'm honest.
But that's leadership in general.
Yeah.
That's the same as your internal comms or anything else. It's always that the more senior you go in the business, the more you've got to understand the wider stakeholder environment on everything that you do, whether that be social media, internal comms, how you dress, how you speak to people in the office. Yeah. All of that stuff is the more senior, the more you've just got to take over the wider stakeholder.
Yeah.
It's the politics of business. And I think I learned during my career that I didn't like politics, but politics of business is a fact of life, and you have different stakeholders that you have to manage. And if you don't, then you become a victim of that politics if you're not careful. And that just falls under that for me. I want to talk about culture because you mentioned it earlier. And I think you're right. The social media policy is kind of related to the culture of the organisation. So describe to me, I guess, the culture that you are creating, that you're trying to create within John Good Group. What does that look like?
Hi guys, just jumping in. I want to talk about one of the services we offer, which is robotic process automation, also known as RPA. That is software that replicates human behavior. So if you've got people downloading spreadsheets, attaching them to emails, going on portals, downloading information, moving data around, all that stuff is perfect for a robot. So if that's interesting, get in touch. Let's have a chat. Let's see if we can help. Enough from me. Back to the conversation.
It's a really interesting one because of where the history of the company has been. Okay, so there was a hell of a lot of focus that went into the business that was sold. It was definitely the jewel in the crown of the group at the time, and the other businesses were arguably underinvested, to be blunt. And what that drove in terms of the behaviour within the organisation was not a negative thing, but it was very, very focused on the here and now, let's keep what we've got without pushing any boundaries or taking any risks. So culturally, it was a reasonably sort of frozen environment in terms of how they wanted to change and were they open to change. With that sale has created an opportunity really for us to relook at the entire group, okay, and how we want to move it forward. And one of the key drivers behind that has been the generational shift from the 5th generation to the 6th generation being the major shareholders within the business, and the 6th generation are very different to the 5th generation. They are both. John, who's the 5th generation, is an amazing guy, steeped in logistics and shipping history, superb guy, knows everything. Is that just sit and talk to John all day? You just get lost for hours. Amazing. Tim, so different, passionate philanthropist, passionate environmentalist, but also went off and built his own businesses. So he's far more open to taking risks. So we're in a really transitional phase, not only in terms of the culture, which I will come back to, but in terms of what we want to try and do. But to actually, to deliver on Tim's ambition, we're going to have to really try and challenge some of the norms within our existing businesses, because you can't have a passionate environmentalist who owns the company with businesses that are warehousing and logistics, horrible for the environment, shipping, horrible for the environment, corporate travel, horrible for the environment, right? So let's not try and beat around the bush. The 3 businesses we're in don't align with the values of Tim. But to square that circle, the approach is we could get out and moan about it, or we stay in the industry and try and lead change. And that's effectively the approach that we're taking with our existing businesses. And while we're small parts of the cogs of those industries, we can definitely do things because we're more agile to go and do those things. So that's the first bit. The second bit is transitioning the business away from its existing business lines into some of the businesses that are trying to tackle some of the biggest issues. So we're actively now pursuing an M&A policy about acquiring energy transition businesses, so EV charging businesses, heat pump, air pump, We're looking at solar businesses, so insulation. So we're actively trying to move the group away into these new marketplaces that better reflect actually the values of the shareholders and the family. So how do you make all that work in the context of the culture? Well, the first thing we had to do was rebuild a central team that was open for this challenge. And to be honest, I was quite fortunate with the way that all happened, because I arrived as employee number 3 at Group. Right? So we had Ben, we had Steph, and I arrived in the January. So I've got a blank canvas. So from a me perspective, I can build a central team in the vision that we want the future to be like, rather than trying to change the culture that's historically been in the business. And that's allowed me to go out and find 3 or 4 exceptional people in their own field. So Ben, CFO, is ex-PwC, bright as a button, young guy, really ambitious, brill. Rich Welsh, CMO, he joined in October last year. Super enthusiastic about everything, really knows his trade, is already making real big impact into our positioning and how we do our sort of go-to-market strategy. And he will put a rocket under all of our businesses in terms of growth. And we'll come back to that, because that's one of the low-hanging fruit where we can really evidence that what the group wants to do can change the cultures within the business, because we're giving evidence straight away, straight off the bat, what we're doing is working. David North, so he is a systems innovation guy. He's been in our travel business. The travel industry is a whole heap of white label systems knotted together, integrated to get somebody on a trip, right? So he lives and breathes this whole integration of systems and how you can make all these things work to create products for end users. And I look at his skill set and say, well, we need that in the rest of the business, because why can't that work in shipping and logistics and some of these other things? And last but definitely not least is Rachel Lowe, who joined us in January. She's our Chief Human Resources Officer. Rachel's ex-Victoria Plum. She is superb. And her ability to take strategy and the commercial ambition and then change that into what we have to do around our people strategy is frankly the best I've ever worked with by some distance. And while she's not necessarily made the impact yet, let's face it, she's only been in 10 weeks, the impact she will have over the next 9 to 18 months is going to be ridiculous, and actually is going to help really drive some of that cultural change. And all of that work is to underpin the movement of a group of companies that is very focused operationally and very focused purely on service, to one that is a little bit more ambitious in taking risks and wants to try and grow and thrive in their own marketplaces. And to do that, that's why we need to get the marketing right, to do the low-hanging fruit, to show that growth is possible. We need to back that up with a load of investment into our people experience or our employee experience, to really make sure people know that not only are we trying to deliver it out there externally, but we're also trying to do it internally as well. And that means things like, at a basic level, we're aligning all of the various employee benefits, because they're mixed across the group. That'll be a real step forward in some of those. We've increased our training and development budget about 7-fold relative to where the group was before. So we're already kicking off quite a few workflows on that. There's a massive policy review, which goes back to things like the social media policy we were talking earlier, to make it more reflective of the demographic that we've got in the business today, as opposed to quite a lot of dry policies, which were a better reflection of the demographic that we had historically. So we just got a whole heap of change going on, and that's really my big challenge over the next couple of years.
So just going back to the increasing training 7-fold, or the budget for learning development 7-fold. When I joined here 7 and a bit years ago, one of the things it was, and I've worked for PLCs, family run to PLCs, whatever, and coming here, it was the training was on another level, and it was like, wow, this is, and I was a ripe old age, and I was like, brilliant, I'm all for learning. So with the people that have been in the business a while, knowing that actually, do you know what, we've got a new leadership team that want to invest in us. What's been the sort of feedback in actually, do you know what, great, what, has there been I want to learn, I'm all up for that, or has there been, I quite like it how I do things as they are?
Complete range,
right?
A real complete range. So I would say the bulk of the guys well up for it. they like the vision, they like the plan. They've all gone through a strategic review themselves. We've got that documented. They know where the plan is, and they see the value in upskilling the guys to be able to deliver on the plans that they have put in place. So there's a cohort of people that are right up for it.
Yeah.
There's a middle cohort. They're a bit like, I quite like my job the way it was, and I'm not sure I need to necessarily do that. And there's a comms challenge in that. So you've got to sit with them and explain why and take them on a little bit of the journey.
Yeah.
There'll be some that then go into being big advocates for what we're trying to do, and there'll be some that go the other way.
Yeah.
I think it's a really healthy culture in a business where you accept that there's people that have come to the end of the journey with your company. And that's not saying I'm sitting here wanting to get rid of staff. That's not what I'm talking about. But as businesses evolve and you progress and you change direction and you adapt to the external environment and what it needs, the business has got to change with that. And acknowledging that a little bit of churn in your team and people that don't want to go on this next leg is fine. You're not a bad person. You're not in a negative place. I don't think anything less of you. But this is how we're going to be.
Yeah.
And it is get on board. Or actually, let's just shake hands and go and find a different way, because we are going in that direction and we will do the things we want to do.
Yeah.
We'd love to take you with us, but it's not going to be at all costs. And you have to meet us somewhere in the middle on that journey.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I need to develop everyone, and I don't want everyone to be a star, right? It goes back to the old football analogy. You don't want a team full of strikers. I don't want a team full of strikers. But people have to at least engage in what we're trying to do if we're going to genuinely deliver on our ambitions to go and be one of the best family employers in the country.
How do you deliver that change? You talk about comms, which I'm sure is a big part of that. But when you've got that mass of people that you want to kind of move from where they are currently to the new strategic plan, strategic review that you referred to, how do you make that change happen? What are the tools that you use?
I think engagement in the team is incredibly important and right at the start of all of that. So too many people go a bit down the track and then try and bring people in and then trying to keep them up a little bit and then speed them up, and then the plan changes a bit and you end up with a bit of a camel as opposed to a racehorse, because all of a sudden you're trying to get everybody involved in the project, right? So my view on a lot of things is trying to get as many people involved as early as you can in the engagement side. So the Fast Forward plan, which is our 3-year strategic period, we've called it Fast Forward. We call it Fast Forward to give it a name. Because once it gives a name, it becomes a real thing. Whereas if it's just our strategy, everyone goes, "No, it's just our strategy." It goes in the top drawer. It's called Fast Forward. Fast Forward is referred to in the regular conversation in the building, which means I know it's translating. It's part of our Fast Forward plan. We're doing this because of Fast Forward. You'll have heard it if you hear any of our guys speak. They'll reference Fast Forward, which is a big tick for me. That means the guys are at least buying into what we're trying to achieve. But engagement early is super critical to all of that. You touched on comms straight away, and I'll always go back to comms. Being a marketing sales guy, I think everything starts there really, but it's frequent, regular, so people know when to expect, but more than that, incredibly honest comms. So praise the stuff that's going super well, call out the stuff that isn't going well, tell people what you're going to do about the things that aren't doing well, and then be seen to deliver on the areas that you need to improve on. I think far too many people shy away from the negative news around stories. They can be the absolute best time to bring a team together, to regalvanize, to redirect, to bring some energy in. You've got to use that obstacle as an opportunity to do some of those things. So the comms piece is then incredibly important. After that, it's going through some of the right stages. So it's doing, looking at the vision for the future. So where are we trying to get to? And make sure that's nicely and clearly defined, and then communicate it. One of the big things and one of the big challenges for my leadership team, especially the managing directors of the operations, is they are quite operationally focused. So my encouragement to them is always to try to drag them out of the day-to-day as much as possible. Keep your eyes open, look around you, what's happening. And I think there's 2 ways to really do that. You've got to find joint direction, and then you've got to create boundaries, because boundaries create focus. Okay. And as a leader, you don't have a load of time to do 1,000 things. You've got to focus on the really clear things. I heard a really nice analogy the other day about this topic, and it was, a leadership role is a little bit like creating of a river. So the river is your direction, the edges of the river, the boundaries, the banks are the boundaries. And if you don't have those two things, you've got a puddle. And it sort of resonated with me to say, right, well, actually, that's absolutely true in terms of what you've got in terms of your plan and your strategy.
It's true.
And so that's a big challenge with the leadership team, is making sure that they've got those boundaries. Really, after that, then it's into the culture of the individual businesses and how they operate and the challenges that exist within those businesses. But it's about recognizing the gap between where we are today and the vision. And then just after that, becoming obsessive about the processes. I work with a few leaders historically who are just always about the vision and about the vision and about the vision. And you never get there because they're not obsessive enough about the processes that you need to put in place to take you there. And that's really where you take the strategy into operations. And then it becomes about your processes and about your workflows and ownership and delegation and all of those other things, which become the building blocks to take it up and do that change. And without some of those, you can talk as much about vision as you want. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a process and there's lots of bits to it. But there's sort of some of the key things that I'm thinking about when I'm talking about change.
So I'm always conscious that I'm going back to something you said a couple of minutes ago. But so when we were having, or the royal we, you're having these, here's all the positives of what we're doing and where we want to go to. But how internally has it been received? You know, with the frankness of we haven't quite hit this milestone for these reasons, and calling people or departments out or businesses out. Is that different to how it used to be in Gen 5 to Gen 6 type scenario? Yeah,
so I don't think we're there yet, John Good, if I'm honest. I still think there's more sensitivity and feedback than there possibly should be, because people are still getting used to this idea that you can have frank conversations.
Yeah.
And that's not on them. It's about their role and their input and their impact. Okay. And I still think we're all getting used to that. So if I go back once, a couple of career choices ago, was the Right Fuel Card Company. That was a brilliant environment where they talked openly about stabbing people in the front instead of stabbing people in the back. Right. And the whole idea was you can just be really honest to the other person and they accept that what it is, it's about trying to find the best result. Yeah. And it's not about you personally. You can be a great guy and I love you to bits, but this bit here isn't working. My own mental model, my habit, for want of a better phrase, is 5 claps for every slap.
Okay,
that's how I try and do it internally in my own mind. So I'm looking for 5 ways to praise you before I come and give you a slap, knowing that the 5 bits of praise open up the opportunity for the bit of criticism or the challenge to be well received. And that's a bit of a mental model that I have. But so it is about the balance of your claps and your slaps.
Yeah.
Do you do the slap at the end?
What's your clap and slap ratio?
I probably don't get to 5. It's probably a good learning for me, that. But
noted.
I think the model of focus on what's good, but then bring something in terms that they can build on. You've heard it a few times from me, John, surely.
I have, yeah. That's why I was asking what the ratio was. I'm thinking I get more of a rib sheet than a pat on the shoulder.
But you're absolutely right. And I think, in fairness, this place, is in terms of spectrum, has got a good culture in terms of an openness, a willingness to have difficult conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not easy to create that culture. It takes time.
It does take time. But when you're there, that's when the magic happens. Because you're really in a place where everyone feels they can contribute. Ideas are shared openly, but if your ideas don't get any airtime, you accept it and you move on.
Yeah.
And you find you get into really good working relationships with people when you can get there. It's just not easy again.
To a certain extent, within your delivery team, the sprint reviews and things like that, while they're not slaps, they're actually a good way of actually reviewing how a team's delivered something and the other team going, actually, have you thought about doing it that way next time?
Yeah.
That's actually...
One of the BPCs, instead of calling it sprint review, calls it bare your ass time, which I think is a good way of summarising it.
Who calls it that?
Adam Forrest.
Does he?
Yeah. It's good. It's like, right, let's bare our ass over the last 2 weeks. What did we do that we could have done better on? Let's get that on the table. And that's brilliant. If you get into that cadence of every week or every 2 weeks thinking, how could we have made a 1% improvement on what we've just done? over time that gets better and better and better.
Sure.
But it's the culture is the hard bit to create in that sense.
And how long do you think it took you guys to get there?
I think, in fairness, when I came into the organisation, it had that culture already, and I think that's a long-standing, it's a kind of sales-driven culture, if I'm honest, where it is probably a more straight-talking department than most sales department, and I think that filters down into other areas as well.
Yeah,
would you agree?
100%. Going back to my background, this excuse me, this is the first role where actually it's been 3 or 4 claps and then a slap, and it's like, but the slaps actually, do you know what? That's fair, and actually. And it's the first place where it has been completely sort of transparent, as in, do you know what? Yeah, you've done a good job. Well done. Or do you know what? What have you learned from that? Let's not make that mistake again. And that's 7 years I've been here, and that's always been the foundation. And I think that's now has filtered around all the other sort of departments. And then obviously when Steve came in and sort of developed a delivery team, the methodology Agile has enabled that with the reviews. So I think there's a lot of checking and inspecting, and then just making sure, do you know what? Yeah, we could do that better. Did that well. Let's maintain that, and then let's do that. And I'm in sales, so you're right. You don't want to lose an opportunity or lose a big deal for making a mistake that you may have made 6 months ago. It's like, we'd need to learn from.
Yeah,
I think it's how you deliver the feedback as well. It's not just what you deliver, but try and split emotion from actually I'm being constructive and trying to help you do a better job, improve yourself, which will be good for all of us. And as long as that's a grown-up conversation and you act as a grown-up conversation, I think that should and often goes down all right.
Slightly ageist here. Do you both to you both? Do you find, because I know sometimes because of my age, sometimes, and picked up on something you said, Adam, earlier, sometimes do think it's rather than it's like, I see it as it's John, you're failing at this, that, or the other, rather than actually just in the role that you're doing, John, we need you to do that. Do you have either of you, do you have any, are there any sort of typical age demographics where you have more trouble getting it across or to get them in line or on board, whatever the word is, rather than, a role? Can their age be a...
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, me again. Just jumping in to talk about one of the processes that we often get asked to automate, which is the processing of supplier invoices, also known as accounts payable automation. So what does that mean? Well, most businesses receive invoices from their suppliers, and a lot of businesses still have people that are manually reviewing those invoices, making sure that they're correct, making sure they're accurate, and then manually rekeying them into a finance system or an ERP system. Well, our solution can automate that process. So typically an invoice will come in, we'll use capture technology to understand what's on that invoice. We'll then match that data up against goods received note to make sure that we've received the product. We'll match it up against purchase order data to make sure that somebody has placed an order for that product. And ultimately, if we can match that up, we can automatically push that into an ERP system or finance system, and nobody has to touch it. How good does that sound? If there are exceptions, if there are things that need to be checked, that's fine. We can use digital workflow to push that to somebody to eyeball it and say, is this correct or does something need to change? Ultimately, though, that can then be pushed again into an ERP system or a finance system. This is about making your life easier. It's about making operations as quick and as efficient as possible. And we do that all the time. If that sounds interesting, then get in touch. That's enough from me. Back to the podcast.
I'm not sure it's an age thing. I think it comes down to the personality of the individual.
I'll leave.
And you can get some of the older guys in the team who have done it a certain way forever and they can't accept it because it's always been this way, so you get barriers up. And then the flip side of that, you might have some of the younger guys that are just super hungry to learn and they'll just take it.
Yeah.
But I can also find some of the younger guys that well, no, I learned this at uni. This is the way I'm doing it. Or I did it at my old place. I did it like this. And what do you know? So I think it is down to personality as opposed to age.
Yeah.
I also think, especially with the new generations that are coming to the workplace, I am seeing a bit of a difference in how people take feedback over those that have never actually been in a workplace and have always worked externally or remotely.
Yeah.
And their ability to take feedback and direction is quite different to somebody that might have landed in the workplace and has always been in a workplace. And I think that's actually a as we move forward and hybrid working and all the other things happen, I think that's going to be the bigger challenge. The guys that always work at home, and then when they come into a workplace, how do they deal with that? And how they deal with the personal interaction as opposed to over a screen or an email. So I don't think it's an age thing, but I do think we might have a different issue in terms of how and the way people work in relation to taking feedback.
Yeah, I would agree. I think different personalities take feedback better than others. I think with younger people, with all people actually, I think a personal development plan is a good way of bringing feedback to the table, because you can say, well, where are you now? But let's work on a plan. Where do you want to get to in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, right? Well, we can see in order for you to get to there, what do we need to work on? And you can kind of coach that out of them. And off the back of that personal development plan, you say, well, in order to get there, we need to work on X, Y, and Z. And that's a good way of, I think, constructively giving feedback in a positive way that shows somebody that they've got career progression within your organisation. And that's probably easier to do with younger people, but so maybe it is.
We, whenever people start here, Adam, we do an insights thing. I don't know if you ever come across insights. No. It's different colours and it's characteristics of a person. And I suppose I'm going to put you under the light here now. I
thought I was meant to be the interviewer. What's going on here?
Do you? Would you know I'm not expecting you to know it verbatim, but would you know your teams in general, the rough sort of colours they are? And if you do you manage them according to that?
Yes, I do, ish. I don't necessarily think it's the colours that they are. I think each individual in the team, I probably know how I'm best having a conversation with them. So with you, I can be quite frank. With others, I need to probably use more of a coaching approach and get them to come up with the answer as opposed to me being very direct.
Yeah.
But that's just, as Adam said, the nature of different people, different ways of working.
I'll let you carry on now.
No. It's a good question. Okay, yeah. So I will jump. I've lost my place now. Right, let's jump back. So you mentioned earlier that you've got, I call them legacy businesses, but the kind of traditional business of John Good Group, and that you're looking at how to improve the environmental credentials or change those organisations to be more environmentally friendly. And that's a challenge, I guess, as you said, when you've got warehousing and shipping, etc. Mm-hmm. So what does that actually look like? How do you bring environmental credentials to those industries?
I think the first thing you've got to do is get your own house in order. So that's a big focus for the group for the last 6 months and for the next 12 months, is really understanding our own carbon impact and making sure that we've got all the right ways to measure and assess our impacts on the environmental bit, and expanding out on that into some of the EDI stuff and beyond to make sure we really understand where we're at. I think if we start making too much noise about any of those things too early, we're throwing sort of stones in glass houses, and that's not going to end well for us at all. When you've got a business that's got 190 years of heritage behind it, you also are acutely aware of all the reputational risk about getting this stuff wrong.
Yeah.
So the whole greenwashing piece and over-reliance on offsets and all of these other things. So it's a really sort of tight rope to sort of walk across to find our way through all of this. But so we've done a big exercise this year. We're completely clear now on our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions across the group. We're working quite hard now on the wider supply chain emissions, so we understand the influence we can have around those. I think once you've done that stage and you get your own house in order and you start your reduction plans and any offsetting plans that you've then got to look at how you can influence the wider stakeholder groups within the various different industries. Okay. So if you take our travel business, for example, we now have representatives on the environmental steering groups and some of the other BTA groups, so they can start to engage and talk about some of these key topics. So that's stakeholders on this side. And then on the customer side, we're now undertaking sustainability training with all of our operations guys who book the travel for customers. And we're now regularly presenting back on every call the environmentally friendliest way to travel. So don't do a domestic flight, do a train trip.
Okay.
And making sure that they get all the visibility and reporting around those things. So we're not a big player in any of our industries, but we can still influence everywhere that we go in terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. We extend that further we've got a big foundation, so the Matthew Good Foundation, and we put a lot of volunteering time of staff into the foundation as well as a sizable donation every year. But even those initiatives now, we're becoming increasingly focused on volunteering around initiatives that are going to improve the environment or work with the local communities. And a good example of that is we're all out at Spurn Point. There were 7 or 8 of us out at Spurn Point at the back end of last year. We were trimming back the bushes to clear the roads. We were cutting grass. We're doing all sorts. But even then, we can influence, and that where we put our focus is going to be on the areas where we can have some sort of impact. And that's going to be the starting place for us. We've then got the broader group in the group's direction, and we're really clear that by the time we get to 200 years, we want our existing businesses to be on the smaller end of the business. They'll still be there. We'll still be doing what we do, but we want to give a lot of focus to the industries and the marketplaces that are genuinely trying to tackle some of the issues. And that, hence my reference earlier to the energy transition part. That's going to be an area where we play. It speaks to our values. It speaks to a growing marketplace. It makes sense from a group perspective, purely from an investment side.
Yep.
We've got to go that direction, because if I look at the existing industries, they are going to come under loads of external pressures over the long period of time. And we need to try and find our way through some of that.
So while it's environmentally, it's great, commercially, that sounds like that stacks up as well. You're moving away from kind of declining, maybe not declining markets, but markets that are under a lot of external pressure into growing markets that are only going to get better and better over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly that. And one of the things that you get when you become the sort of steward of this business is they hand you a book on day one, and it's 190 years of history, okay? And you read this book, and it's all about the original John Good, who fell off a ship as a boy and was rescued 2 times and then went to take troops to Trafalgar, and all these stories, right? It's amazing history. And then you go, oh, shit, I've got to look after this now. I'm not going to be the guy that messes all this up, right? This is the job. So it comes with a little bit of pressure. This isn't a 2 or 3 year old business or something. This is a special thing. And so back to your point. So part of my job is to make sure that we are thriving in 5 years and thriving in 10 years. And that'll be a roller coaster like every business. But we talk about the business being here in another 190 years. And it's my job right now to manage this transition. And it's actually a really difficult job. It's not like, let's do a bit more of a different type of logistics, or let's do a shipping job, or, that's all similar. Yeah. We're going off in quite a different direction.
How do you create that kind of shared vision, shared purpose for the group when you have got almost like a conglomerate of different kind of organisations within there? Can you create that still under a shared purpose? Or
I think where we are today, we can, because we've got maybe 110 headcount. So we're not that big that you can't know people's names and engage with them on a personal level and know some of the stories around the business. So right now, and especially the way we set the business up, the group is all about the central services, that group of people I talked about earlier, and what they can bring. And none of our businesses could justify any of those people in their own right. They just couldn't. So that works because everyone's got that vested interest. As we grow, there'll be maybe another layer of management come in. That's going to be more difficult. But ultimately, the values, the family values and Tim Good's values are incredibly strong. Incredibly strong about what he wants and what he doesn't want. And Tim, as a shareholder, is a brilliant guy to work for because he gives you a bit of the direction. He tells you he wants a business that he's proud of that reflects his values. Then he gets out of the way. And it's my job to see the values delivered into operational bits. So I will never be let off the hook on that. Those values are going to run through thick, regardless of what industry we operate in. That environmental focus is going to be there. Our passion around people is going to be there in a big way, and making sure that the people that work for us are well looked after and cared for and developed and all the things we've talked about. And the bit that I'm trying to bring to the party is the performance bit, right? So the 3 Ps there, that's our 3rd P. Because in my mind, the more performance we can drive into the business, the more we can do the transition story. And the better we do the transition story, the more that the group can do its social good ambitions through our foundation, because we'll just keep plowing profits in that way. We don't have a greedy set of shareholders. It is bizarre from my background, right? You weren't greedy, all the former people I worked for, honest, but they took out big dividends, right?
Yeah.
The guys are very, very relaxed about the dividend policy. They take a fixed amount every year. It's quite modest relative to the profit of the group. But the whole principle is put it into the foundation, or put it back into the development of the business. And it's that mentality that's come through 6 generations. It flows into the business today, and that gives me the confidence to know we can carry on doing that investment story, because in other businesses you don't get that. It's the money drops into the bank account, gets to the year end, right, I'll have all of that, please, right, do it again now, and you've got nothing to work with. It's not like that at the group at all.
The fact you're in your 6th generation just shows that approach works and works well, because there's very few businesses I'm aware of that have reached that milestone. That's incredible.
And think of all of the things that the business has weathered. World War One, World War Two, at least a handful of recessions. Some privatization, publicity, just loads of different things that have gone on within all of that, and it's still here today, and it's gone through all those different challenges.
What about technology? Is technology an opportunity or a threat to your existing businesses, or in terms of innovation, are there opportunities for that?
I think it's huge, actually, and I think that was really the main reason why I wanted David North to come into the group, to bring a bit more of that innovative thinking to the group structure that he showed in the travel business. If you go across all of our industries, so warehousing, logistics. So on the logistics side, we run 18 HGVs at the moment. There's clearly a massive conversation happening about what type of fuels are going to be used in the future. Is it going to go electric through battery tech? Question mark. Are we going to see a hydrogen play coming in? Is it going to be a late revival around some new, more sustainable, more oil-based product? Who knows? And I see people talking about hydrogen. We've looked at hydrogen. In my mind, that's some distance off.
Right.
With your bigger vehicles, batteries still aren't quite there yet. I think in the white van market, batteries are going to be massive. And I mean that in the next couple of years, I think that's really going to dominate. The range is going to be right for a white van man. All the right size, the costing is going to be right. I think that's a perfect marketplace, and we'll see a big shift there. But at the larger vehicle end, I still think we're arguably some way off. You look at our warehousing. Warehousing is a really interesting challenge. So you don't have people that want to be forklift truck drivers anymore. You don't have people that want to be warehousemen anymore. That it's becoming less and less. People aren't interested in those jobs. So we have a great team, long serving, and they've all got some years left in them, which is great. So we're not talking about a problem right now. But if I take a 15-year view, we're going to have an issue unless we can bring some more talent into our warehousing environments. So palletized automation has got to be a way forward for us, where we can deal with less people, but still deliver ultimately end service and just do a small bit of movement around the end and into the vehicle itself. So I think there's massive on warehouse and logistics. Shipping is going to be a really interesting one. Same energy source of ships is going to be a big deal. But I also think you're going to see technology around the whole port infrastructure start to change. It's still quite a legacy business. It's a lot of email. It's a lot of people. To be honest with you, my view is that the port and the whole shipping industry is a perfect use case for blockchain. But what you're going to need to find is some of the real big players embrace it. And if they embrace it, the whole thing's going to fall in line. And I could see that happening at the right time, but it's going to need one of the real material players to go, well, this is the way we're doing it. And everybody else go with. But you can see all the various, customs and port entry and all these different things. You can see how that works for a blockchain. So I think that's going to be really interesting. In terms of technology in and around flights, our corporate travel business, the platform play has already happened in the industry. So that's been the big disruption actually over the last few years. So technology is driving what the customer expects. But even there, I think we're going to see massive energy change in terms of how we travel and where we travel. And I think there's arguments for both blockchain, but also AI in and around the booking of travel and the prediction of booking of travel, and actually integration with people's calendars. And right, I see you've booked to go from London to LA. That books, that drops in your calendar, and there's your ticket. Do you want that choice, or this choice? I can see all that coming in the next few years.
Do you think technology will reduce the number of people that are traveling for business purposes?
I think the pandemic's done that.
Is that going to
you think that's already happened then?
I think to a certain degree it's already happened, because the pandemic happened, corporate travel was never going to come back ever, right? But broadly speaking, our business is ahead of 2019, which is the last full year to do it. But the industry's about 85, 90%. So we're getting back to those numbers. What the pandemic did, as you guys will know far better than me, is just get everybody really used to Teams and Skyping and all these other Zoom and all the rest of these functions. And people are now used to that. So I think there's some of the short meetings. Remember those meetings that used to be an hour drive? They now all happen on Teams. Yeah. But there's still nothing like a face-to-face conversation. There's still nothing like being in the room, read the body language, how you're interacting with people, all those things that you lose on Teams and the like. So I think the market has shifted to a degree on that. So you may make slightly less frequent trips. You might have gone to see somebody abroad 3 times a year. You might do it, or 4 times a year. You might do it twice a year now and do 2 on Teams. I think that's changed, but that want to go and see people is still fundamentally there, and people still are wanting to go out, and the results show that.
It's strange because I find that so this morning I went and had a face-to-face over in Scunthorpe, and it was I have had a reasonable number of face-to-faces, but I found that dealing in Teams has made me more productive because I'm not having that hour journey there and back. So I've lost 2 hours of my 8-hour day. But then actually when I go on site to see someone, you're right, the physical interaction of just, getting an understanding of the surroundings, because you don't see that on a Teams. All you get is, the corporate background and things like that. Amazing. But actually, I had one of my closest friends, I remember, I'm going back 7 or 8 years, but it was like, oh yeah, I can't come on, I can't come on this golf trip, whatever. I've got to fly to San Francisco for a 2-hour meeting. And I'm flying back, and it's like, obviously now that's a Teams thing. It's no brainer, but that used to be like the norm. And I'm like, what? You got to fly all the way over there for it? Yeah. And I was like, and he had a very senior role. And he was like, yeah, I've just got to oversee the meeting and then I'll come back. And I'm like, that just blew my mind. And by the pandemic coming, that's kind of put that. I'm going to say the word nonsensical. It's probably harsh, but the nonsensical travel, it's taken it out, because actually everyone can be more productive if you can just do it over Teams. Doesn't do the travel business any or planning travel business any good, but it sort of makes sense. Whereas, like you said, Adam, instead of going 4 times a year, if I go twice a year, those visits are going to be way more, I would assume, productive and dare I say enjoyable, because it's less frequent and it's more valued if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. The other, an extension of that as well, is the other really interesting thing is now more people are home working and there's the hybrid mix. What we are seeing as a trend is businesses are looking to bring all of their people together for events more than they did previously. So this is the way that they're getting around this. Not everyone's seeing each other. So now you maybe go and do that trip, but they're also then bringing the rest of the team on the trip to extend it, to then do a meeting, a conference, a get together, a training session, because they have to now to build some of that cultural stuff in the teams. Yeah. So that's the first thing that's been really relevant on the back of the pandemic and the way people are working. The second bit is this notion of pleasure. So it's business and pleasure. And employers now are far more comfortable in saying, well, look, historically, you're out on a Monday, we want you to fly back Friday, and that was what was expected. More businesses now are saying, well, look, you're out there on a Monday, fly back on Sunday. You're going to be doing that trip anyway, but take 2 days to go and see that place that you're visiting and enjoy it. Yeah. Right. And so this idea of pleasure is now becoming increasingly prevalent actually in bookers, and you've seen a slight change there.
Love that, pleasure. That's a new one. I like it. Okay. Last question for me around the podcast is called Tomorrow's Workplace Today. So we ask each guest to cast their mind forward 10 years and think. We've touched on some of this already, but what does the workplace of John Good Group, for example, what does that look like in 10 years that is different from today?
We will need to embrace quite a lot of technology to really go on the journey that we want to go on. And we're going to have to try and find really high skill capable people to deliver on the back of some of the gains that give us that technology. I think we're going to be a far bigger business in 10 years time than what you see today. And that's going to provide and create a load of challenges for the business. And that can't always be solved by just adding more and more people. We're going to have to up our tech IQ quite significantly, I think, if we want to go on the journey that we want to go on. I don't quite know how yet, and it will depend on where we go. But it's pretty clear that we're not going to be able to just keep throwing people at problems, and we're going to have to embrace more technology within our business if we're going to really be the business that I want it to be. And I think that's probably the biggest change that you're going to see in John Group over the next 10 years, that the transition from the industry and then what that group actually offers in terms of its people and its tech.
Superb. I'll leave it there. Adam, thank you for joining us. Absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No, thank you. Cheers.